Thank you for attending tonight's meeting of the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. The agenda will be displayed on the screens in the front of the room. You may also follow along by connecting to the district's website, www.wcsoh.org. You can select the district link, then select Board of Education, and then the board docs agenda, and select tonight's meeting to follow along. There are two opportunities to address the board this evening, the first being agenda item 6.01, and the first set of public comments is relative to agenda items 7.01 through 11.01. Please state the agenda item you are referencing at the beginning of your comments. The second opportunity is agenda item 12.01. There are sign-up sheets located at the table in the back of the room, and each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board, and a timer will be shown on the screen. And with that, Ms. Marshall, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Byrd?
Here.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Here.
Mr. Velarda?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here.
Ms. Cotter?
Here. At this time, I would like to invite you to say the Pledge of Allegiance with me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Looking ahead at the agenda, agenda item 3.03 would actually require a board vote. So I would like to entertain a motion to discuss and vote on agenda item 3.03 before we head on to 3.01 and 3.02.
So moved.
Second.
Can you please call the roll?
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velarda?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Ms. Cotter?
Yes. And agenda item 3.03, is it 3.0? Oh, 3.01? Did I change it? Okay, anyway, sorry. The Westerville Education Foundation resolution, I would like to entertain a motion and a second to approve that resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Can you please call the roll?
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mr. Velarda?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Yes. And now that that passed, I would like to recognize Mr. Velardo to talk about district recognitions.
Thank you, President Cotter. We have a couple of really neat recognitions and honors to give tonight. To do that, I'm going to first go to the podium. I will ask my fellow board members, Dr. Kellogg and Ms. Marshall, to stand up front here and allow us to get in place as we continue. This first recognition is to honor those students who were delegates to Buckeye Boys and Girls State. We were talking to some of the delegates beforehand, and I shared with them, I asked them how the experience was. And I can tell you that every year, they continue to be yes? Am I doing that one first?
Yes, right?
No, we're going to do this now and then do or whatever you want. Right? Buckeye, right?
It's okay. We were trying to be better organized.
We were, and failed miserably. It's really not Jill's fault. It's always my fault. And so I have just heard tremendous things about the delegates and their accomplishments. And so at this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Glenn Golden to come on up and share a little bit from American Legion about these delegates. Would you come forward, please? Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much. I'll adjust this just a little bit here, maybe. Or can everybody hear me the way it is? That's okay, then we'll just leave it the way that it is. There are the two programs, the Buckeye Boys State and Buckeye Girls State, and then the Americanism and Government Testing. So I'm going to read you a little bit about each program. Buckeye Boys State and Buckeye Girls State share many of the same goals and infrastructure. Buckeye Boys State is sponsored by the American Legion, while Girls State is sponsored by the American Legion Auxiliary. Boys must commit to 8 days on the Oxford campus at Miami University, while Girls State requires girls to commit a 7-day commitment at another university campus. Both programs involve mythical states, towns, counties, and local governments in which delegates become citizens and are divided into two mythical political parties, which must participate in campaigns, elections, and serve in various capacities in these governments. As a citizen, each delegate must pay their share of taxes and fees that would exist in any government. The standards of public service are evaluated only when the boy or girl has a thorough knowledge of the American system and keeps informed on public affairs. The goal of these programs, of course, is to develop leadership and pride in American citizens, to educate delegates about our system of government, to instill in delegates a greater understanding of American traditions, and to stimulate a desire to maintain our government process. Attendance also makes participants eligible to apply or be selected for awards, honors, and scholarships. And some of these scholarships can be pretty substantial. We had one last year, I know, that won a $5,000 scholarship per year. She's starting at Ohio State University. She'll be there for 2 years, and then her plan is to go to the American University in Washington, D.C. to law school. She's currently serving as a page to Mike DeWine. So she's really seriously into it. And that goes to show you how people can be stimulated to do things like that. They understand it much better. They know the process of what they've gone through. Last November, the American Legion Young Bud Post 171 of Westerville, Ohio, conducted a 2017 Americanism and Government test in each of the Westerville high schools for the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students. The test consisted of 50 questions covering federal, state, county, and local governments, the United States flag, the U.S. Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence. In addition, each student was required to compose an essay on what do I expect to gain from taking the A&G test and what impact will it have on my future life. Approximately 65,000 students throughout the state of Ohio in 50-plus schools took part in this training program. So it's a pretty extensive program. The American Legion Ohio's 12th district, which composes Franklin County basically, honored Westerville students Cameron Hubble at Westerville Central High School and Adam Wortel, a senior at Westerville South High School, for achieving top scores in the district. Each received a special recognition and a monetary award, and Cameron Hubble was first runner-up in the state of Ohio competition and was first alternate to represent the state of Ohio in an all-expense-paid outing to Washington, D.C. and Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in early March if the first place winner could not make the trip. So that's a real honor. You know, this is the whole state we're talking about here, and somebody from Westerville won that honor. Local winners were picked on the basis of their scores on the tests, and the essays were used as a tiebreaker in the case of tie scores. The first place winners were picked in the following categories. Basically, we picked the top scoring boy and top scoring girl senior and junior and sophomore. So those were the top 6. And then we picked the top ones in the school, disregarding what grade you were, the top 3 scorers in each school. So that's what you'll be hearing tonight. And I'm going to start out reading you. There's some of the people are not able to be here. Apparently there is a flu bug out there. We've had some parents even that called and told me about that. So I will start by reading off the names of those people that are from each high school. And what you'll do, students, is you'll come up here and file by, and they will have certificates for you. I assume I'm correct on that, right? Okay. So Boys State delegates, we had Nicholas DeRose. Well, these are Central High School we're starting with first. Nicholas DeRose. Is Nicholas here? Yeah, there he is. Alexander Drexel. Brent Gabby is not here this evening. Cameron Hubble. Maxwell James. And Alexander Kennedy. Those are Buckeye Boys State delegates from Central High. For North High School, we have Gavin Cave, who is not here. Harry Passarello. Harry should be here. Harry isn't here. Nicholas Thompson. Nick is here. And Trevor Vestal. For South High School, we have Cole Kohler, and Thomas Pappas is not here, but he would be the next. Now the Girls State delegates, also starting out with Central High School, we have Kylie Collins, Melody Klopfer, Peyton McCarthy, Alexandria Michelson, Elada Sin, and Carly Zineker. These are Central High School. For North High School, we have Emily Malik and Emily Stowers, who's not able to attend this evening. For South High School, we have Grace Boble, Rachel Bowden, Grace Boulain, and Ayana DaCosta. So we've had some that had said they were going to be here that weren't able to be here. Like I say, there's sickness going around out there. Okay, now for the Americanism and government test winners. And these are the ones I said that we had top scoring boys, top scoring girls in the different classes. So with, and we're going to try to combine some of these. For Central High School, we had Kylie Collins, Cameron Hubble, and Noah Cleaver. And Cameron Hubble was also tops in his school, and as was, I believe Kylie was too. Yeah, here we go. Kylie was just top scoring junior girl. And we had top scoring senior boy and senior girl. They're both away at college now, so they're not here. And that was Andrew Dova's Scherer from Westerville North High School, Anna Newfer from Westerville North High School. Okay. And then from, those two are not here, obviously. And then Karina Welsh. Is Karina here? She's not here. And we've already met Cameron Hubble, so I assume he's got his award. Jacob Busey from top 3 scorers at Central High School. And Kylie Collins has already gotten her award. And then from North High School, all 3 of their top scorers were seniors, I guess. Or, well, I guess Lexi Bristol was not, but she's not able to be here. She's down in Tennessee, I think they said. But it was Andrew Scherer, Brendan Messmer, and Lexi Bristol. And all 3 of those are not here. And then from South High School, we had Adam Wartall. I think it's here. Is Adam here? No? Abigail Ingersoll, I know she's not here, and Peter Cochran. So Peter's here. I also wanted to recognize the faculty that from the high schools that have been the advisors to these students. They've done a great job. Sometimes it's, I'll say this, it's hard to communicate with the students for me, so I have to go through these people. I text them, I use the addresses to mail letters to them. Letters are a one-way street. Phone calls, they may or may not pick up, because you know how it is with phones. You don't want to pick up some calls because you don't know who they're from. Anyway. So student advisors for these programs are from Westerville South, Mr. Tim Smith. Is he here? I don't think he's going to be here. Westerville Central was Ms. Katie Mahoney and Mr. Don Ogle. Are either one of them here? Don's here. And I know I just got a text from Mr. James Brady from Westerville North High School. He's pretty sick, so, he would be here otherwise, I guarantee you that. He's very supportive. So let's give them all a big hand, because they've just been over there.
Thank you, Dr. Golden, and once again, from the board, from the leadership, from all those in the district, for certainly your teachers, your staff, and to all the parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, whoever is here tonight. We truly do. It's one thing to read the names and you get a certificate and all, but I guarantee you, all of us are very honored that you are a part of our district, and we are very thankful for the above and beyond work that you did at Boys State and Girls State. So if you would join me just one more time, give them a round of applause. We have one more recognition before we let you be dismissed, or you certainly can stay for the rest of the meeting. I always put that plug in. Nobody ever does it, but we always put that plug in. I'd like to invite up, we're going to do this recognition of the Westerville Education Foundation. We already voted on that resolution. That's where we were a few minutes ago. But I'd like to have Colleen Moidu come up, Executive Director of the Westerville Education Foundation, and Bob Gibson. I believe Bob's here, the board president of the foundation. Stand right here. I'm going to read this to you. We are very excited. This is This is such a tremendous organization. And from what I know, what we know, this is a tremendous executive director and has brought, yes, you can applaud for that, yes, has brought a whole nother level to this. But let me just read from the board and leadership this resolution. Resolution of commendation for the Westerville Education Foundation. Whereas the Westerville Education Foundation, WEF, become an official nonprofit organization on September 27, 1993, embracing the mission statement, quote, to enrich the learning experience and broaden the minds of our students through the funding and support of innovative educational programs. And whereas since its founding, WEF has funded 235 grants and district initiatives in the amount of $200,524. And whereas in the fall of 2014, WEF launched its GAP initiative, which harnessed the power of technology to bring online funding opportunities to Westerville City School District educators. And whereas in 2015, the WEF fully funded the startup of the district's Student Connections initiative, which has become an invaluable program for our pupils. And whereas WEF hired its first executive director in 2017 to bring additional focus to the organization's efforts to support innovative educational practices in our schools, a decision, a really good decision, a decision that is already resulting in tremendous dividends in the organization. Therefore, be it resolved that the Westerville City Schools Board of Education and Superintendent, in commemoration of the Westerville Education Foundation's silver anniversary, commend the extraordinary volunteers who make up the WEF for the time, energy, and work they have put forth over the years to bring exceptional opportunities to our students and support innovation in our classrooms. This day, September 24, 2018. Please give them both a round of applause.
I feel a little guilty accepting an award for 25 years when I've been here for about a 50th of that, but thank you all so much. As a Westerville South graduate and a parent of now 2 Westerville students, it really is an honor to be able to be working with all of you to better the educational opportunities for our students and just play some small part in enriching experiences for kids like these. I've had the opportunity this last week to spend a little bit of time with some students, and it was eye-opening to me what I have to learn from them. So thank you all. Am I stuck here?
And I would just like to say thanks as well. I've been on the board probably now for about 7 years, and I do agree with you, Rick, that we made a tremendous decision in hiring Colleen, and the foundation is looking tremendously strong, and we thank all the support from you folks and the community and the school district. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing us to honor the organization. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you to the delegates, boys and girls state. Thank you, sir, for being here tonight. The Westerville City Schools is very blessed, hope that's okay to say, is very blessed to have an engaged citizenry. And you see some of the results of that here tonight. So to you parents who have nudged these students along the path, and to you students that have taken that nudge and are forging your own path, and to WEF and the thousands of hours that they put in to work. We get to be this visible presence up here. You all are the ones doing tremendous work out there. So one more time, a round of applause for all of these folks. One day some group's gonna surprise me. It's not bad.
Yeah.
Nah.
If they do, they, then that thanks.
That's, there you go.
That's the only reason anybody ever stays.
And there you have it.
You're good at clearing a room.
Okay. Hey, I can do it every Sunday.
President Cotter, as the group leaves and gets photographs taken, I always think it's worth mentioning, Rick touched on it, but obviously WEF is self-funded from the standpoint of providing funding for teachers and programs within our school district, and just a huge contribution. I always like to point out Young Bud Post 171, been a member for 11 years. I am the proud father of a former municipal judge at a Boys State. And the best thing that Boys State ever did for my son was when he came home, I said, how'd you like being a municipal judge? He said, I never, ever want to be an attorney, ever. So it has a huge contribution to our students, but it's important to point out that our Legion Post here, by all accounts, has sent more students to Boys and Girls State than any other post in the state of Ohio, and they always do so self-funded, never a burden to the school district finances, always taking care of it as a post, and I think that that's a huge feather in the cap of this community is the Legion Post that we have here.
It is.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item 4.01, the minutes from regular board meeting held on Monday, September 10th, 2018. We don't normally vote on minutes, but are there any questions or comments about those minutes? No? Okay. Then moving on to agenda item 5.01, I believe Dr. Kellogg is going to talk to us about that.
I just need a laser. Thank you, President Cotter, members of the board. I decided to come over here because it's a little bit easier for me to speak from here and share with you. As you know, last week, Ohio Department of Education released this year's version of the local report card. We have spent some time, not considerable time yet, taking a look at the report card and the results and starting to analyze those. So tonight, I'm going to give you just kind of a quick drive-by of what we see so far and some comments about what data is in here is helpful to us and what it says about where we are as a school district. Before I hit on our specific district, and this is going to be interesting because Jill's in the back driving. So, Jill, if you'd click on state in the top right-hand corner. Here we go. Thank you. I just thought it'd be helpful to give some context to some of the data statewide. So if you'd scroll down, Jill. So on the far left on this graph over here, what you see is overall, this is the first year, let me back up, this is the first year that the state has given a overall grade for all 6 components for all school districts, the first time they've done that. And this is a graph of the results across the state of all 608 school districts and the final grades. And so you can kind of get an idea of the distribution of this. Interestingly, as you can see, 28 school districts, roughly 4.6% got an overall A. 191 school districts, 31.4% got an overall B. We fell in the category of overall C with 253 of the school districts, that's 41.6%. 122 school districts got a D, 20.1%, and 14 school districts got an F, 2.3%. So you get an idea of the distribution in this first year of having the report card. That final grade is calculated using the 6 component grades I'm going to go through in a minute. Jill, if you'd scroll down a little bit more, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Almost there, right there, thank you. So anybody at home, if you'd like to, you can go into the website and see this data as well. I think the important one to look at is this now breaks down by school district, the letter grades school districts got on the 6 component grades that I'm going to go through. So interestingly, if you look at, this is just the achievement data that I'm going to go through in a minute. So across the state of Ohio, 14 school districts got an A for achievement, that's 2.3%. 72 school districts, 11.8%, got a B. 211 school districts got a C, that's 34.7%. And we fell in the category of D, I'll talk about that in a minute. 289 school districts got a D, 47.5%, 22 got an F, 3.6%. So you get an idea of the distribution and where we fall in that distribution of that particular component grade. And that one is the one I think most people's eyes are drawn to immediately, is how we're doing in academic achievement. And I'll go through the other component grades in a minute. So there's more state data in here if you're interested in that on this PDF file as well, so feel free to do that. So Jill, if we go back to the live report card now. Let's click on, I'm going to go through real quickly the 6 component grades that you see there. The first one being achievement. If you'd click on that one for me, Jill. The achievement grade has 2 components. One is the performance index. As you can see, we got 89.4 out of the possible 120 points, which is 74.5% C. That metric is a compilation of how every student did on all the tests. So as you know, there are 5 levels of scoring that students can get. Depending on their score, we get X number of points. So for example, being proficient on the test gets you 1 point. Being better than proficient gets you 1 point, whatever the extra credit points is they give you. It's kind of like extra credit. So it really is a measure of how many students are passing your test and at what level. So the more students passing more tests at a higher level, your performance index goes up. I like the performance index. For me, it's a good measure, a solid measure of how all your students are doing on all the tests. And I like that measure of the 2. The indicators met, where we have an F, 3 out of 24, consists of, and this is kind of redundant, there are 21 tests as part of those 24. The other 3 have to do with students who retake the end of course exams for high school because they need the points for graduation. It consists of a new measurement, chronic absenteeism, and it consists of our gifted measure. Those are 3 non-tested components within this one. The other 21 have to do with how many kids are passing the test. The state benchmark for meeting the indicator is 80% of the kids on that test at that grade level have to pass the test. So that's 21 of those. We got 3 of them. This is an area of focus for us. We do want our kids passing the test. We want them doing better. To give you a better idea of how close we are in terms of moving the needle and making some progress on this particular one, on those 21 tests, actually on 12 of them, we had better than 70% pass rate on 12 of those tests. So the difference between meeting and not meeting that gap is closing for us, less than 10% on 9 of those exams. So that's where our focus point has been in terms of infrastructure. I think what we're seeing on the achievement side, as you look at the trend data, we're starting to see a steady state where our data looks the same year to year. I think it's a function of one, our teachers being much more familiar with state standards, which have finally stayed the same for several years in a row. That's very helpful when the blueprint you're teaching to doesn't change every year. It makes it a little bit easier to know what you're doing in the classroom. So our teachers are getting more familiar with the state standards. And we're getting assessment data back that we haven't got before. For example, this year we're actually getting item analysis so we can dissect how students are performing on the test and modify our instructional practices to do that. So we've built a system in place with teacher-based teams at our school so they can talk about that data and make adjustments. So This is a strong focus point for us this year on improving this. Of course, if you're having more kids pass the test and you're doing a better job, your performance index will go up as well. To be honest, of those two indicators, and it's not because it's a better score, it's just because it's a better reflection of the actual performance of all of our students. I like the performance index number, looking at that performance index as a better measure. So that's what compiles the D on the achievement score for us on that particular one. There's trend data in there and achievement levels, all that. If you want to click through that, you may. I'm not going to take the time to do that this evening. So Jill, if you go to the next one, let's go over to progress. This is an interesting data point. This is value added. There's a little history here that I'm interested in tracking. This is a measure of how your kids grew. The concept being that students who outperformed their peers had more than 1 year's growth. It's a very difficult measure to explain to people, but it's the same as you were this tall this year, you outgrew most of your peers, so you had better than average growth. Or you didn't outgrow the average of the rest of your peers, you had less than average growth. That's the concept. Interesting component to this one was 3 years ago when the state gave you the option to do all your testing online or not. We opted to do online testing in all but 2 grade levels. Previous to that year, we had straight A's on progress on value-added measures on 5 report cards in a row. The year we went to online testing in all but 2 grade levels, we dropped to an F. And in fact, the state data, if you remember this, I talked about it at that time showed that an abundance of school districts across the state who had moved to online testing had their value-added score drop to an F. And in fact, in that year, if you go back and look at it, in the 2 grade levels where we did not do online testing, we had better than average growth. In all the other grade levels, we dropped. Because this is a 3-year component, it takes 3 years of data, I think that lag is still within our system, and we should probably climb out of that and start to see some changes here real quickly. And I want to make that point because despite what the data says, I know day in and day out, our teachers are doing what they need to do to grow our kids, and they're making progress, they're teaching the standards, and they're working their hearts off to make sure that our kids are making progress and doing well on the test. So I don't want these performance numbers to deflate people's sense of accomplishment. We are making progress. We'll get better. There's a lot of parts of the system that have to settle out that give us some time to make more progress. So if we go to the next one, please, Jill, if we go back. And let me ask, any questions on the last 2? Okay, I'll keep plowing. If you get a question along the way, feel free. Gap closing looks real nice for us. Last year we had an F for gap closure. This year we have a B. They changed the way they do the measurement. One of the rare times where they changed the way that they do the measurement that benefited us. In the past, the measurement was for every subgroup of students that you see here, it was a percentage of those that had passed the test. They have changed the benchmark from percent passing to the performance index of that subgroup. So they're calculating subgroup performance index. So all the students in that subgroup count towards the performance index. Then the state has benchmarked annually what the state benchmark is, and you are then measured against whether or not you beat the state benchmark. So you see all those red dots, those are the state benchmarks that we exceeded on, which is why we did so well. Don't look in the rearview mirror. Those red dots, the state benchmark, will go up every year for the next several years. It's a moving target. So if you looking behind yourself, you might get caught, is the lesson. So we've made progress in terms of how the grade comes out, and that helps. But again, the disclosure is they've changed the way they measure this. And I actually like this measure better because it goes back to using performance index that I think is a better measure of how all the kids are doing than just whether or not a percentage of kids pass the test.
Well, only because it's like shades of blue up there.
Sure.
The third one down that is, which one is that?
If you hover over it, it will tell you the population. That's Asian or Pacific Islander.
Okay.
And I believe the other piece in here, I don't know if it says it on there, the state has also changed the N size for a subgroup to count. And that's very, very important, right? So they've decreased the, and it'll go down for the next several years, the size of the N sample for the subgroup to count. So it's kind of like changing how many times you flip a coin to determine if it's a 50-50 heads or tails or not, right? If your end size is 2, the probability that you flip 2 heads is not that outrageous. If your end size is 100, you don't expect to have 100 head flips unless it's your friend's coin and they're making money off you. So those are the subgroups. You can hover those.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I've railed on this every year that this comes up, but I do have to point out that when I make strong comments about the State Department of Education's inability to create metrics and measures that reflect actual disciplines like statistical analysis, which is a pretty well-matured field when it comes to mathematics these days. The reality is that a good metric is a metric that measures consistent trends over time. So yeah, I am really excited that we see an F to a B from just a school district standpoint. From a pure mathematical standpoint, it's outrageous to go from an F to a B, only because the form and the method of measurement has been changed. Because now when we have citizens in the community that are trying to figure out, are we improving or are we not, we go, well, they changed the way that we actually measure it. That doesn't help our citizens at all. It doesn't help our school in terms of creating informed decisions relative to curriculum and program. It just simply says, somebody changed the way that the formula is done, and boom, we got a B. And to me, that's all that I need to see on a slide presentation about the scorecard again this year relative to the quality and the level of detail and the level of skill that's been applied at the state level. And it's just bad math.
The careful piece for us relates to strategy and resource deployment, right? So we don't want to chase numbers because we don't understand it well enough to understand what resources we want to deploy. Because there's a finite amount of resources and an infinite number of challenges, right? So I agree with you. So this is where I find these things challenging, even when it's an improved measure for the community. How do you explain? So that's how they've changed that annual measurable objective. Know that red dot will move every year as they try and get more and more kids to be successful in the tests. This is an important field for us. We've made policy changes that I think will ultimately benefit us. For example, as you know, through our work with Lead Higher, we've done great work and outreach towards underrepresented populations in our Advanced Placement International Baccalaureate, some of the most challenging curriculum you can offer, and have increased our enrollment of those populations of students into those courses infinitely. We also made changes in access to the middle school accelerated curriculum that's going to have the same impact over time. So looking for ways to attract more students to that higher end curriculum that we know will help them in performance on these tests. Go to the next one, Jill. Graduation rate, steady state. They still do a cohort model. Once you enter 9th grade, the clock's ticking. Do you graduate in 4 years? You can see that we have a B with a 90.6. For a 4-year rate, they still track the 5-year rate, 94.3. We put a lot of resources into this last year. Here is the fun part. Here's the change in the game. Last year, you may remember that for the class of 2018, somewhere in the late fall, the legislators made a move that allowed us to have an alternative pathway to get some kids graduated who might not earn enough points on the state assessments. I'm really proud of the effort of our secondary team to take advantage of that opportunity for students last year. I've yet to find a school district in Central Ohio that had more kids graduate from that pathway than we did. We had 108, which is about 10%. Yeah. And as I talked to other superintendents, not everybody grabbed hold of that opportunity the way we did. And what I'm even more pleased to say is, through that alternative pathway, I know of several students who are now in 2- and 4-year colleges. These are young people who weren't going to meet the test standard, the 18 points in the right test, but made the alternative pathway and are now gainfully in higher education and in other places. So it's a good piece. The bad news is that was a 1-year deal. There are debates going on amongst state legislators and the State Board of Education right now about what to do with that. And so we're kind of in a we're not in a wait and see mode. We're acting on what we know today. We have a number of students who still need the right number of points in the right test to graduate. There is no alternative pathway. So we're putting resources in place. We've purchased some intervention curriculum to help those students be more prepared and graduate by the test. But this is a place, because of those changes, that we might see a change in our performance as we struggle to get kids to meet things and as policy members change that pathway. So that's where we are for 5-year. We got a B on both. Next one, Jill. This is my least favorite metric. Here's the important piece, and actually I'm going to talk about this one for a second, that 92.1%. This whole metric has to do with the state's third grade reading guarantee, which states that students who don't pass the third grade reading guarantee benchmark, which has gone up every year since they started, may be retained in third grade. We worked very hard on this component the last several years and have had great success with our pass rate on the third grade reading guarantee. Now, interestingly, we got to look at this number, and it didn't align with our internal numbers, and we think we may have discovered a data problem, where some of our data either didn't get reported correctly by us or didn't get caught by OD. We think that this number, this 92.1%, is below what the actual number was. So we're trying to sort that out in the little bit of time we've had the data. What we get a D for is for kindergarten, first, second, and third graders who take a pre-test and a post-test, and if they don't do well enough between the pre-test and post-test, we get this grade. Okay, I'm a track guy, you know that. I don't care if you lead in after lap 1, lap 2, or lap 3 in the mile. What I care about is where you are when they cross the finish line. And for 90-something% of our third graders, to pass their third grade reading guarantee and be called a D just doesn't seem to line up well for me. I will tell you, I've heard the state superintendent talk about this metric as well. He doesn't seem very excited about it. I'm hoping we see some changes in this one in the future. I just don't think it helps us. I think our folks are doing a great job getting our kids across the finish line for third grade reading guarantee. And I think we have the right things in place, so I'm pleased with that one.
Our people are doing a great job, not only getting the third graders across the finish line, we're doing a really great job getting the kids across the graduation finish line
Yes.
as well. And that's one of the things that really burns me up, because the grades don't adequately reflect what we do. As we look at where our kids are and where they go to and where we help them get to, you can't see it in a lot of these grades, and it's very, very frustrating. This one is textbook frustrating in the way it looks. But we do a heck of a job getting kids to the finish line and getting them over the finish line. I am bothered by a lot of these grades. I am most bothered, though, by the methodologies.
I agree. Having kids get to the finish line in third grade and get to the finish line of graduation, the theory on third grade reading guarantee was always that the research demonstrates that kids who can't be successful to read at grade level by third grade are less likely to graduate.
Right.
I believe there's some flaws in that data, but we'll go with it.
Even if there are flaws in that data, there's a reasonable assumption to be made about the correlation of the two figures. All right, so that, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, on what planet is 92% a D? It's not this one, except in this particular part of the state, in this particular metric. But it could be a false correlation. But look, if that's where research has led us, that it's a strong indicator of your capability of getting through school, and the numbers are relatively close, then we should be looking at metrics like that and going, there's something we can actually measure, all right, and we can measure consistently.
So kudos to our staff who do such great work on this one, because there's a lot that goes on summertime all year long. I really appreciate what they do. We have a lot of resources that goes into making sure those kids are ready for the third grade reading guarantee and beyond. It's not just, it doesn't end at third grade. If we could go to the next one. So the last one is prepare for success. There's components of this I like, components I don't like. Here's how it's done. On these measures on the right-hand side that you see, these are all compiled. These percentages are compiled by your last two graduating classes. So on this report card, this is data from the class of 2016 and 2017. So it's in arrears because they don't have all the data by the time this report card's done. And so it has all these participations. What does irk myself and some of my folks that work in the secondary department, Scott Reeves points this out often, I don't think there's anything up here other than honors diploma that doesn't have a test attached to the end of it. Not a single one of them. There's also some discrepancies. I can tell you, for example, policies that school districts have related to some of these and access is an important definer. I can tell you, because I created it, in Bexley City Schools, if you take an AP class, you're required to take the AP test, and the school district pays for the cost of the test. That's a policy difference that's going to change their participation numbers greatly from what we have as a percentage of your students. And that's a policy difference that we see. The other thing you're going to start to see is two good points. Advanced placement participation. If you go back to last year, this is about a 5% increase. I think that's an early indicator of the success we've had with our reach out to other students for AP, particularly our underrepresented populations. And in dual enrollment, our College Credit Plus program that we've grown, that's grown 9% on this metric from last year. The rest of them have held pretty steady. I would expect to see some changes there in the near future too as we continue to push some of these components.
I have a little concern with this as well. For instance, the dual enrollment credit piece. I'm a little concerned that we get graded on that, though I understand why the state wants to do that, because the assumption is we want to drive that percentage up, whether or not kids are ready to take on college-level work. And it doesn't take into account the socio-emotional development that should accompany the dual enrollment piece. So again, there are components within the methods that are used and the items that are identified to rank us on that concern me. I've also had conversations with a number of parents who say that they want their kids not to feel quite as stressed by taking all APs and honors and going for dual enrollment and so forth and so on, that they would like to back it off some. And yet, if they back it off some, the state says, oh, you're not ready, even though in actuality they may be more ready because of the decisions the family has chosen to make. So I find this one to be more political than it is educational.
I've asked policymakers at times, what percentage of my kids should be taking AP courses? Yeah, I don't know that anybody has a number, so I think you're right. And that balance of us pushing kids and pushing them before they're ready is a careful balance. Our teachers, our school counselors, and our parents are best judges of that. I've always said as a principal to parents, you know best what goes on at the dining room table late at night than I do. So if you're telling me your kids really shouldn't be taking 3 AP courses, that's fine. If you think they can and you see it at home and it'll work, that's great. But you know better than I do. They don't fall apart at the dining room table at school. They fall apart at the dining room table at home, and that's an important measure. So, and there is a lot of research out there about the stress kids are feeling around these kinds of components. It creates that system. We got to be careful that we don't let the metrics drive our discussions with kids and create the kind of situation you're talking about.
Hey, John, I have a mechanical question.
Yeah.
I don't know of any student that is diligently pursuing a specific ACT or SAT score as a threshold score for the school that they want to get into in this district that isn't taking the ACT or the SAT 3, 4, or 5 times. So I'm personally familiar with a late-stage sophomore that took it, and within that cohort, that would have been a remediation required ACT score. By the time she took it her senior year, it wasn't. So how does that factor into these?
Great question. I'm not sure how they're using previous scores. I don't know if they're just using the score from their senior year. We'd have to do some research on that one to ask the question. It may be their best score recorded up to that point, similar to admissions. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to the question.
I mean, it's hard to imagine that, I mean, there has to be a certain population that's taking an ACT or SAT one and done, right? It is not the norm these days. It was the norm when we were kids, but it isn't the norm these days. So I'm curious how that factors in.
This is another one that's had a change in measurement. So if you see, last year we actually had 51.1 points and got a C, which created a great mystery that Greg Vibrantz unwound real quickly. If you scroll down, Jill, teacher changed the grade key. So last year, this 52.5, which was better than our 51.1, would have been a C. This year it's a G because new teacher changed the grade key. So it's calibrated, I think, to previous year's performance as the state tries to figure out where to put it. I think there's a couple measures here that are really important to us. One, we are interested in our kids being successful on those state tests without making that the marquee event of the day. That's important to us. With that comes growth. We are very committed to gap closure and having more of our underrepresented populations of students perform at a higher level. We are interested in K-3 literacy, and I think that's a place we do a great job. We are very focused on graduation. We continue to be focused on that. We do have resources and programs in place to give kids the opportunities to participate in these pieces that the state says are prepared for success. The place I think where we're putting most of our attention this year and resources, we've built components to those other places. The place where we need to do some work is on the achievement side with our performance on state tests. And to that end, we're doing a lot with our teachers, now taking the tools available to us with item analysis, taking a look at the content standards. We've built an infrastructure of teacher-based teams where they can sit down and talk about them and use that to reflect on instruction. It's very difficult to take a standard, which is a written words, about what something's supposed to look like in the classroom and interpret that. The best interpretation comes when you're looking at test items that show you how it's tested, and then you go, oh, that's what they mean. And that's standard, and you pull it apart. And that's what we're working on this year with our principals in our building. So hope to be back next year with some improved response, some improved reports, but that's where we are with the state report card.
The item analysis piece is, I think, going to be hugely important to us. As I look at this, and as I've talked with people in the system and people within the community, most people, including me most of the time, you look at a grade card and you think you know what the grades mean, because we all have perceptions of what an A, a B, a C, a D, and an F are. And yet when we look at what goes into these particular grades, oftentimes it's much more confusing than just what we believe it to be. So I think that it's very helpful to talk about what makes up the different components. And I don't like some of these grades. I don't like the way they're factored. I also have concerns, though, about some of the achievement that we've gotten. So there's a lot I don't like from both sides. But I think understanding not only what the standards mean internally, because I think there's been some unwitting confusion about that internally, but also understanding what the grades mean, not only internally but externally, is an important thing. One of the things that I think I have come to is, as you say, this should not be the marquee event for our education system. It's a balance. The Westerville education is not just about state performance. And in many ways, I think a Westerville education is much more than, and much greater than, and much better than what the state report card shows us to be. And I'm extremely disappointed in the fact that this report card doesn't really say who we are. As you were talking about, the lead hire components, we're talking about expanding access and opening pathways and making more opportunities for more kids to grow, and looking at how we're getting the kids over the finish line, looking at graduating kids who otherwise would not graduate. In our last board meeting, we spent a lot of time on programs that focus just on that. And I don't see that. I don't see who we are evidenced in this beyond a slice of time number on tests that were given in so many ways. And I know there's a lot of other stuff, but I'm talking about the achievement thing primarily. So we need to maintain our balance. We need to maintain our balanced outlook. We don't here want to chase test scores. We don't want to do that. But on the other hand, we know that the standards are important to meet. So we have to balance the need to achieve the standards and reach the test scores with the need that we have to make a Westerville education as unique as it oftentimes is. So I know there's a whole lot of things that I was saying there. We need to stay balanced, and yet we need to be very clear about where our balancing occurs and how we make sure to keep both the state components and the Westerville components aligned and balanced together.
I agree. This is the other thing that I tend to look at as a comparative piece is, so we have a community of people who have made a large investment in the resources we have available to us. And so one of the things I'm always interested in is, how do we stack up in terms of opportunities and experiences that our kids have versus other places? Because you can live anywhere, right? So what opportunities are present or experiences present elsewhere that you can't have here? And I think that's an important piece. How are we using the resources we have to give kids the opportunities, families the opportunities, and the experiences that we want them to have? That's infinitely more important to me than some of the numbers on here. These are important to me, but that's what's more important. I know what the answer to the question when they come home from school, how was school today? It's not, well, we got really well prepared for the state test today. It was, my English teacher, made me angry, and my math teacher made me happy. Or school was okay, in my case, right? So there's a bigger picture here, and I appreciate our board recognizing that and our community recognizing that, and we will continue to look at the numbers and try and do what's right. Any other questions or comments? Thank you for the time, appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item 6.01. We don't actually have anyone signed up for public comment, so we'll skip ahead to agenda item 7.01. I would like to entertain a motion and a second to approve the financial report investments for August 2018.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Marshall?
Thank you, President Cotter, members of the board. What you have in your board packet today is the August 31st month-end financial summary, along with investments for the month. Year-to-date for the general fund receipts were $66.6 million. Year-to-date expenditures for the general fund were $31.8 million. The unencumbered fund balance at the end of August was $136.1 million. For all funds, year-to-date receipts were $78.1 million, and year-to-date expenditures were $40.9 million, with an unencumbered fund balance for all funds of $156 million. Are there any questions about that?
Can you please call the roll?
Mr. Florida?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Ms. Cotter?
Yes, sorry about that. Moving on to agenda item 7.02. I would like to entertain a motion and a second to approve a resolution for the issuance of certificates of participation.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Marshall?
Yeah, so this is exciting. We have a resolution on the board agenda. This is to issue certificates of participation for the renovations of South High School. The board approved the renovation we're in the design development stages currently with Triad Architects, and this resolution will help us fund the project. A lease purchase agreement is a non-voted debt issue. We are paying for it with revenues from our already voted permanent improvement levy. We have a tax anticipation note that is rolling off in fiscal year '21. So this will allow us to continue those payments going forward after that time. I actually have our underwriter in the audience today. That's Patrick King with Stifel Nicholas. That's the firm that we're using to issue the debt.
So will you talk about the breakdown for it, please?
Yeah, so with the breakdown, so we have $39 million in total. $37 million is to go to South renovations, and then $2 million will be set aside for safety and security improvements. It's the first phase of the district's safety and security plan throughout the district. So it's $37 million for the South renovation and $2 million for safety and security projects throughout the district.
And would you mind giving an overview, once again, of what a COPS is and what it does so people understand what we're doing?
Yes, so a COPS is a lease purchase agreement. You can think of it sort of like a mortgage on your home. So in this case, South High School is the home that we would have a mortgage on. Really, you could think of it as refinancing a home. So we'll be paying lease payments to a leasing company. Buckeye Leasing Agency is who we'll be working with for that. And it's subject to annual appropriations by the board. If for some reason we failed to meet a payment, they could potentially repossess the building. That's certainly not likely to happen. They would, of course, work with us and try to sort that out before anything. I've not known of any one to ever have a building repossessed through a COPS deal, so I'm comfortable with this financing. The difference, there's been some conversation about the difference in cost between a COPS and a regular GO bond deal. The difference is about 10 basis points spread. It's not a lot. Again, this is something that we can do without going back to the voters and asking the voters to approve additional revenue, and we're able to get substantial renovations with South High School with it.
And I think it's also important to think about the fact that this comes from, you mentioned that this is money already approved through permanent improvement levies. The way that I have looked at it is that I need to make improvements to Westerville South and the safety and security pieces as well. I need to do that now. I can't wait on the permanent improvement dollars as they come in.
Right.
This lets me take care of items that would have been paid for in all likelihood and possibility through permanent improvement dollars. It's just paying for it now rather than bit by teeny bit over the coming years.
Right, and so the district's PI levy generates about $9 million a year. So $3 million of that goes to the tax anticipation notes that there were some other improvements that were done. That was a 10-year period. Those are coming off in '21. The rest of the $6 million goes to current improvements throughout the district. Mr. LaRose and Scott Dorn have a whole schedule of things. There's lots of things, we have some high needs with our facilities. And so that helps to go pay for that. So this is just setting aside the $2.9 million. It's continuing at the same funding that we've done with the tax anticipation notes. Now, this does include an additional $1.5 million for the first 3 years out of the PI fund. We are looking at, with our financing options, it's going to generate some premium. We may be able to offset that payment slightly, so we're looking at that right now.
So just a quick reminder that the renovations at South is going to be a 4-year project.
Yes.
And we have no idea what we will encounter in that time. So we are not saying that we are spending $37 million on South. I mean, we have to spend that much, but that is not the cap for this project.
So for the purposes of the COPS, we'll borrow $37 million through that mechanism for funding. So I've had a couple of questions recently. I think people read the newspaper with the city. They had some bids come back higher than anticipated. We will have some safeguards in place with our current PI funding. We also will be earning interest because it is a 4-year project. We'll slowly be spending that money. So we will have some interest revenues that will come back to the district that, unless the board designates that for something else through a resolution, will have to go to the project.
The $37 million, you're saying? What
Yes.
about the interest?
The interest.
Right,
Unless the
okay.
board designates that for something else, it will need to go to the project.
Right.
So that would be on top of the $37 million.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? No? Would you please call a roll?
Sure. Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Ms. Cotter?
Yes. Okay, moving on to agenda item 7.03, a resolution to appoint a delegate and an alternate delegate to the 2018 Annual Ohio School Boards Association Business Meeting. I would like to entertain a motion.
I would like to make a motion to appoint Dr. Nestor Baker as the delegate and Mrs. Davidson as the alternate delegate
So excited.
for the 2018 Ohio School Board Association Business Meeting.
Is there a second?
Richard?
Second. I was just determining whether I was going to debate this or not.
Do you want to do it?
No.
Oh,
Would you please call the roll?
Mr. Velarde?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Dr. Nesbaker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Ms. Cotter?
Yes. Okay, moving on to agenda item 7.04. I would like to entertain a motion and a second to approve the October 2018 five-year financial forecast.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Marshall?
On me. Okay, President Cotter, members of the board, thank you for having me. First, as your treasurer, this is my first five-year forecast with the Westerville City School District. And I'm kind of excited about it, I got to say. Because of the COPS, I know it's sad, right? But no, because of the COPS resolution, because we're selling the COPS, we're actually scheduled for pricing on October 11th, and they're scheduled to close on the 25th. That was assuming that the resolution got passed tonight. There's some disclosure requirements that go along with that, and we'll have a first reading of a policy later in the agenda that kind of we'll talk about that a little bit. But I couldn't have my forecast approved in between that time or close to that time, so it was kind of we need to get it done and get it on this agenda. So I apologize for the late addition to the agenda. But here is the five-year forecast, even though it's September, this is for the October filing requirement. Where do I point at? Oh, I gotta turn it on. Okay, that might help. Okay. So the purpose of the forecast is it's a valuable long-range planning tool. It does serve as a basis for determining the district's ability to assign the 412 certificate. That's ensuring that we have the funds to pay for contracts and annual appropriations. To provide a method for the Ohio Department of Education and the Auditor of State to identify districts headed toward financial difficulties. The requirements of the forecast are to file it no later than October 31st. Currently, that's actually changed into November next year, starting in 2019. It'll be November from that point forward. It needs to include the current fiscal year and the next 4 fiscal years. And we have to update it no later than May 31st each year. Of course, that's not going to change. They changed the November date, but not the May date. It frustrates me because of the way the state's biennium budget goes. We're not going to know by the May update what that's going to look like. I wish that they would move that a little closer to the end of June, but nobody listens to me. We also include 3 years actual information for historical purposes. So a forecast generally has 3 sections: revenues, expenditures, and fund balances. And this is our total forecast, just the whole picture looking at it. I've cut off the 2 fiscal years just to fit this on one page. Looking at revenues, this is a summary of that. Overall, we're anticipating slight increases beginning in FY 2020. When we look at where we ended in fiscal year 18, and most years generally follow this, we had about 61%. That's actually up about 1%, and we'll talk about that in a minute, of local property taxes that we received. And state foundation and reimbursements were a total of 32%, with 7% made up from everything else. Our local property taxes, you can see the general property tax line there decreased. Overall, they're 58% of total revenues. Increase overall is expected from growth and expiring tax abatements. We have several tax abatements that are expiring. Actually, 87 of the 112 we have in Delaware County expire in tax year 17 for collection, or in tax year 18 for collection in 19. So we have a reduction in FY19 is expected, mostly due to payments from the federal tax law changes. There were some changes in what you could deduct on your federal taxes, so people hurried up and rushed and got all of their payments in before the end of the year. So that's just really a shift in timing, mostly, more than it is a decrease. Public utility property taxes are about 2% of total revenues, and we're expecting slight increases from growth there. When we compare local property taxes comparison of May forecast, I've decreased the assumptions quite a bit. General property taxes, a reduction I decreased due to the change in residential new construction growth. We had a high year in tax year 17. It went from about 8 million to about 18 million from 16 to 17. So looking at 18, we don't know where we're going to end up, but we've lowered that assumption because of that. Public utility property taxes, there was a large reduction of about $9 million due to an error by the county auditor. So Franklin County Auditor inadvertently included about $9 million in assessed value that was actually belonged to Worthington City School District. Worthington Schools notified us of the error, and so the May forecast, we didn't know that when the May forecast was done. So we know it now, so we've updated our assumptions to include that. So state foundation and reimbursements. So all these things we get from the state. Unrestricted and restricted grants and aid, they're capped by 3% for FY19. We have 2 new budget cycles during the forecast period, the first one in fiscal year 20. So starting next spring, when we're talking about the May update, we'll be talking about what the state's thinking about doing with the budget. We probably won't have much of a clue. Hopefully we'll have the governor's budget by then, and maybe we might, I don't know. The forecast assumes the same funding model and a 2.5% cap for the forecast period. I did write down the history of the cap because I kind of wanted to mention this just for reference. So in 2014, the cap was 6.25. In 2015, the cap was 10.5. In 2016 and 17, it was 7.5, and then they came back and reduced it to 3% in 18 and 19. So they do have a history of reducing the cap, so I have no reason to think that they wouldn't do that again. I'm just hoping that they don't decrease our revenues at this point. The district lost $12 million during fiscal year 18 due to the cap, and we're projected to lose another $11.5 million because of the cap. Property tax allocations, they're reimbursements, direct payments from the state for homestead and rollback reimbursements, and those assumptions follow the property taxes. This is just a difference of the May forecast to the current forecast, and again, it's just the difference of changes in assumptions, and we're using ODE's most current payment report, and that's why that restricted number went up so much. And this is just a comparison of all of our revenues to the May forecast. There's only a slight change overall in that. Things that are uncertain about revenue, the state budget, we don't know what they're going to do. Our property values, we don't know where that's going to go. The economy always affects people's ability to pay their property taxes, which we rely pretty heavily on. And legislative changes, I feel like they like to throw new things at us constantly, so. Here's a summary of our expenditures. We are expected to have our expenditures exceeding our revenue beginning in fiscal year 2020. Expenditures for fiscal year 18, we had about 76% for personnel costs and 13% for services. Those are our 2 largest line items. For personnel, they're a total of 76% of our total expenditures. Teachers had their pay spread out over 27 pays during fiscal year 18 due to the payroll creep. We pay every other Friday, so we have 26 pays typically in a contract year. Last year was spread out over 27 pays. The forecast includes adding 11 FTE for fiscal year 2019, and then an additional 10 for each year throughout the forecast. And this gives us some room for growth and then addressing the needs of our special education children. My van drivers, they're currently paid through the ESC. This was a new program, we brought it in-house this year. So they're currently paid through the ESC. The plan is to bring those folks in-house to the district starting in 2020. So that's included in the salaries. Fiscal year 23 personnel services is inflated by approximately $4.5 million due to the 27 pay dates in a single fiscal year. So sometimes there's a lot of confusion and people think, hey, you overpaid, or, and just like when we spread your pay out over 27 pays, they think, hey, you're shorting me money, you owe me money. So because we spread out over 27 pays, last year, it's not going to be an issue when we have 27 pays in a fiscal year. So we're not actually accelerating anyone's payment. It just happens that we have 27 payroll dates in that fiscal year, which is actually July 1st and June 30th are both pay dates. So it happens about every 10 to 11 years. Health insurances are anticipated to increase by approximately 8% throughout the forecast period, and that's based on current trend. And so we have a good story to tell about that on the next slide. Well, not the next slide, the slide after this, sorry. Purchase services includes payments to other districts for tuition for special needs and other students, and payments to charter schools and utilities and other services. There's a decrease going from 18 to 19. That's mostly because of the new My Van program. So that was a purchase service contract that we had with TriStar that we brought that in-house, and now we're paying them out of other objects through the ESC. Materials and supplies includes textbooks, software licenses, things like that, that don't have a useful long-term life. Capital outlay includes equipment, technology, and other items. And other objects includes the services from the SCO for things like substitutes, the My Van drivers. Those are our biggest costs out of that line. So we compare all of our expenditures to the May forecast. You can see the differences there. Personnel services, the main reason for that change is the 27 pays. Benefits savings due to health insurance savings from concessions and negotiations and better than anticipated claims. I will say the district was anticipating double-digit increases in the health insurance, but because of the new negotiated agreement, the staff agreed to increase their deductibles by $300 for a family, $150 for a single plan, which it resulted in significant savings in addition to our claims coming in better than anticipated. Other expenditure lines have been adjusted just based off of the 2018 year-end balances and using those as a base year going forward. Expenditure uncertainty, staffing needs, and the educational needs of students, economy and inflation, healthcare costs, and legislative mandates. Those are things that we need to watch out for as we go throughout the school year. So here's an overall picture of what this means for our fund balance. So this shows the 3 years history and the 5 years going forward. We are scheduled to deficit spend beginning in fiscal year 2020. Not by a lot, but that grows fairly quickly. And the state has historically underfunded the district. Just losing $23.5 million this year and last year could significantly offset our deficit spending if that weren't the case. And the district will need to start evaluating some future levy options to help offset that state shortfall. And this is just a little handy graph down there in the corner of that and what that looks like.
Nicole, if I can just take a second, because I think it's worth pointing out that sometimes with the complexities of school financing and funding, the simplest things are lost. We see what our deficit spending looks like. We see very pointedly that we're underfunded by the state according to their formula. The state receives that money from the income tax payers in Westerville. So the simple piece that's missed, that is the cruel irony in all of this, is that as we come back onto the ballot for our citizens to approve more money against their property taxes, our formula will continue to put us at a disadvantage because our Westerville citizens will be showing their capability to pay, which is factored into the equation that determines how much of the income tax of the citizens here get taken away from our citizens by the state legislature. So,
That's true.
that's
And then
kind of
they
messed
cap
up. Yeah. I've actually used that recently when people ask me why I'm so insistent that the state legislature and the governor have shown no spine in fixing the 4-time unconstitutional state funding model in the state of Ohio. there is no better reason or example or argument than the fact that we lose $23.5 million worth of income tax, and if our voters elect to pay more money for our schools to be successful and our students to be successful, the state will keep even more of your income tax.
Well,
That's not right.
and the simple truth is that it is their funding formula.
Yes.
Your formula, your math, says we should get this. Don't have a funding formula unless you have a way of funding that formula. This is not us kicking the state, because there are some good people trying to do some good work there.
I will say that the funding formula, there's a basic aid amount that's an arbitrary number at best. I mean, I think years ago, they came up with that amount based on some method that was probably fair, but it hasn't kept up with the rate of inflation. And, you know, there are a lot of good people that are trying really hard and doing a lot of great things towards this. There are several flaws in the model itself. One of them being charter schools, our payments to charter schools. I recently did a presentation for Real Choice Ohio at their fall conference, just talking about out of our $5.8 million in expenses that went out last year to community schools, the state only funded us $1.8 million of that. So that was $4 million in local dollars, our local taxpayers paid for to go to those charter schools. And then look at their report card. What are they doing? And that's, our local taxpayers are paying for that. So that's just one piece. It's the same thing for any open enrollment out kids that go to other districts, the STEM schools, community schools. It's just fundamentally flawed.
Well, it's a 1-2 punch. It's a punch of, here's the funding formula we are going to create that says you will get this amount, but you're not going to get that amount, even though your taxpayers are paying that amount. And the other piece of it is, it's been ruled unconstitutional. And if I do something that is ruled by the legal authorities as inappropriate, they will not rule on me 4 times. And so, again, and none of us just want to bang on the state.
Well,
Times I do.
no, I do, I mean,
That's why
I think
look-
I think the numbers are fascinating here, though. I mean, a simple question to those who are watching at home, and those who are with us here this evening. The simple question is what could this district have done with, over the last 2 years? The $4 million differential in the charter school space, times 2, and the $12 million and the
12.
$11.5 million, right? The $31.5 million. What could this district have done with those funds for public education programs and opportunities for our students in this district, which, by the way, wouldn't have cost a single voter any more money? It was our $31.5 million as taxpayers to begin with. So what could we be doing in this district if there were not those holes being punched in our finances by other entities?
And how long would it keep us off the ballot for having to ask the taxpayers to pay more locally because the state has played a shell game with the dollars that we are entitled to receive according to the state? This isn't something that we made up on our own, saying that we should have the additional millions of dollars.
It's
This
not
is
our
money-
funding formula.
That's right, it's not our funding formula.
Right.
We abide by what we have, but it's really important for people to understand that the state giveth and the state taketh away fairly substantially. You know, when we talk about a cap, you were talking about if we broke the law, we wouldn't be ruled on 4 times. I also couldn't turn to you and say, you know what? I owe you $10,000, I'm going to give you $2,000 and we'll just call it even, right? It's all good, yeah? Because that's not the way it should work, and yet that's what we are held to. We are, under the state's formula, entitled to a certain sum of money. The state has chosen not to give it to us, and at the same time, the state has chosen to take locally generated dollars to help pay for charter schools. It is a 1-2 punch, and we are getting it straight in the jaw.
Yeah, I mean, you can hear our frustration, and I suspect that the reams of people watching this online and will watch it later also recognize that there's a frustration, because to be really blunt, I run into people at Kroger, and they're frustrated with this. I run into people in McDonald's, and they're frustrated with this. And the only thing I say is, I say a few things, but the only thing I say is, I really want to share with you, this board, and I will speak on behalf of this board this time. You would be quite surprised how this board is trying to resist this. We don't just talk about it up here. And it's at best discouraging. Because Richard says, what good could have been done, and then just drill that down to the school, and then to the teacher, and then to the student. And that student, and the 92% that pass the third grade reading guarantee, but we get a C, and what does that make that teacher feel like? What? So I'm doing all this. It is disappointing, and you are doing a fine job on this 5-year forecast here, and we've just kind of usurped this whole thing.
No.
You opened
I
up that
appreciate
can of
the coverage.
worms.
No, and I agree wholeheartedly. I've complained about the state through most of my career when it comes to their school funding model. I will say, though, I went back and I looked at just the district's history. I went back to 2009, so the district ended with a fund balance of $4.8 million with a $135 million budget. So those were some really tough times, and you can see a history of cuts that have been made throughout the district and some really tough decisions that have been made. And 2009 is the last time that the district actually asked for new money levy. It's been prolonged for a very long time, and I think the district's done an excellent job of prolonging that to where we don't have to go back to the voters and ask for more money. And, the hope, I think, as we're planning, is that when we do go back and ask, that we don't have to ask for a whole lot that is just unmanageable for people. And so I'd like to, start the planning so that we can have those conversations, so we can be thoughtful to our taxpayers in our next ask for this.
I think it's important, and I'm not going to, bash on the state about this. I'm done with that. People look at our balance and they say, we've got all kinds of money. You don't have to worry about what the state's doing. You clearly have pots and pots of money, and why are you even talking about deficit spending and future levies and so forth when you have so much money? It's important to realize how tightly we've been holding on to the purse strings of that balance, because the balance inevitably must go down as we enter a time period where, we're looking at our expenditures outpacing our revenues. We've known that was coming. This isn't a surprise. We've known it. We've talked about it. We need to be talking more about it. But because we've known it's coming, we have been holding the dollars as tightly as we can to make the years last as long as they possibly can before we go back again. So it's something we look super healthy, and we are super healthy right now, but you only stay super healthy if you're looking out into the years to come.
Yeah, so I mean, if, just looking at the forecast, so when we did this in May, 22 was the last year of the forecast, and when you look at that, it's a great picture, and, but then when you add that next year, and then just think, when we add 24, what does that look like? I think it's important to plan so that you don't end up to where we have $5 million in the bank. I know there's been instances where we've had to delay payroll because of financial difficulties, and, I think if we plan ahead.
We never want that to happen again.
Any other questions or comments? This is the end, right, of the presentation?
This is the end of my presentation. Next one's questions. See.
Okay. Oh, did you have a question or comment?
Just a quick comment, thank you. I think we made a really good choice in our treasurer. And so, thank you for the explanation and just the good work.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate that.
Would you please call the roll?
Sure. Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Ms. Cotter?
Yes. Okay. Moving on to agenda items 8.01 through 8.11. I'd like to entertain a motion and a second to approve and discuss.
So move?
Second.
Dr. Hopkins?
Good evening, President Cotter, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg. I'd like to present to you for your consideration tonight's personnel consent agenda. Some of the highlights I'll address right now. We have 2 retirements that will become effective at the end of the school year. Ms. Kathy Bechtel, who's a reading specialist at Huber Ridge, along with Kathleen Van Wassen, a 2nd grade teacher at Huber Ridge, on the board agenda before you tonight. They will be retiring, and we'll be celebrating their retirement at the end of the year, and the fact that we will be losing 54 years of service between the 2 of them. So we're excited for them, and we'll recognize them again at the end of the year. In addition to that, we have 8 resignations from various classified and classified pupil activity positions, some one-time payments to cover staff participation in various professional development activities. As far as employment goes, we have the employment of 11 individuals in various classified positions, and some employment and update of individuals in a number of supplemental contract and classified pupil activity programs. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments? No? Okay, thank you. Can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo? Ms.
Yes.
Cotter?
Yes. Okay, there is no old business, so moving on to agenda item 10.01, policy 6146. This is new business post-issuance compliance for tax exempt and tax advantage obligations. I believe this is something that our treasurer is going to cover.
Yes, it is. So our bond counsel informed me that we have to have a post-issuance compliance for tax exempt and tax advantaged obligations policy in place. So since we're issuing debt, so this just covers that it's my responsibility for post-issuance. We have certain disclosure requirements that we have to meet. There's also some limited uses for tax exempt facilities that are financed using tax exempt bonds. We can't run a business out of a for-profit business, that sort of thing. So this policy just ensures there's a facilities use worksheet that's included in that we would, if somebody decided to start a business out of South High School, we might want to have them fill out, sort of thing. So that's what this is. This will be the first reading, and I'll ask for approval at the next board meeting to have it in time for us issuing the COPS.
Okay, are there any questions or comments? No? Okay. Moving on to agenda item 11.01, I would like to entertain a motion and a second to approve donations.
So moved.
Second?
Any questions or comments? Okay, could you please call the roll?
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Ms. Cotter?
Yes, and of course, we were always very grateful for the generous donations. Moving on to agenda item 12.01, public comment. There is nobody signed up for public comment this evening. Agenda item 13.01, board comments. Any board members have comments tonight?
You mean more? No, I have none.
Anyone? No? It's not a requirement. No takers? Okay. No board comments tonight. Moving on to agenda item 14.01, the board will meet for a work session on Monday, October 1st at 6 PM in the Skybox here at the Early Learning Center. We're going to be discussing facilities again. And then on Monday, October 8th, we will have a regular meeting at 6 PM in the board training room here at the Early Learning Center. At this time, I would like to entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Ms. Cotter?
Yes. Okay, thank you all for attending our meeting tonight. We are adjourned. You want me to bang the gavel? Okay. Again, thank you all for coming tonight. We appreciate your attendance and patience and attention.